On a Sunday here at the Voice of College Football. How about that? Well, we got a special edition of Sooners Live here, a 61st edition. 2 Plain Sports came recommended. So you know what? Got on the horn, got them in here, and we appreciate them jumping on board. So we got Jose Escoda, we got Jacob Brumbaugh, and we got Brandon Martin on the line from 2 Plain Sports. Get on over there and check out their channel here on YouTube. How you guys doing today?
Great. How are you doing?
Thanks for having us.
Doing well. Would love to get your take, as we will for the next 60 minutes or so, on Oklahoma football. You guys know the drill. Leave the comments and questions there in the live chat, and we will get to them. Jose, we'll start with you in regards to recent recruiting situations out there. Of course, official visits are huge in June. A lot of camps going on. What is creating the big buzz with the Sooners and Oklahoma fans?
Yeah, so it seems like right now it's really all defense that's getting the buzz going with the fan base. I think we're all expecting the defense to be significantly better. It was improving steadily, but not where any of us wanted it to be. We were still letting a lot of big plays happen on the defensive side, a lot of missed tackles. So with Brent Venables coming in as the head coach, Todd Bates coming in as the defensive line coach, Miguel Chavez, and all the rest of the defensive staff pretty much getting an overhaul. I think we're all expecting to hopefully soon enough be fielding a top 10 defense in college football. And that seems to be where all the hype is. Personally, I think the one maybe concern, and for those people that watch our channel, I'm always hitting on wide receivers, but I think that this staff has done well with getting a couple in from the transfer portal. And then they're still focusing on a few of the 23 guys, but it seems like with coming in December and January, they're a little bit behind the 8 ball compared to some of the rest of the staffs around the country with getting some offensive guys in front of them. But I think in 2024 that'll be a big change with the recruiting focus.
This was a big weekend for us too, as far as recruiting goes. Well, we had, I think, over 30 kids on campus with our Champ U barbecue, and that's positions all over the place. I think we've talked about on our show a couple of times as far as these next week or so. I think we can see 5 or 6 commitments come into Oklahoma just based off this weekend alone. This is going to be a big weekend for OU sports and something to keep an eye on this next week coming up.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of positive momentum, like you've been saying, Jose, on the defense. And OU, we talk about a lot of recruiting and everything. And yesterday or last night, there was a top 8 released by Derek Williams. He's the number 2 safety in the class according to 247, and OU was put in his top 8. And he has been not on our radar at all. And he seemed to be really interested in Oklahoma, and someone that I was shocked to see put OU in his top 8. Number 2 safety, before the new staff and the momentum that they've been gathering, I just feel like the last staff wasn't able to do that. And, just earlier this week, they had the number 1 defensive lineman, or DJ Hicks, and then they had Anthony Anthopus this weekend. A lot of 5 stars, a lot of talent, a lot of positive momentum that I feel like we wouldn't have had with the past staff.
Guys, it seems like Brent Venables wants to make sure that whomever commits is solid. Like, okay, we've built this relationship. We want you to be sure. Go do what you need to do. Go visit. Go do what you need to do. We don't need to, the fans, obviously, they want the commits to come in. They want to see the high rankings on the commits, and they want to see volume of commits. But it seems like Brent Venables really wants to make sure that somebody has reviewed their situation and really is locked in on Oklahoma. Did we see any other differences between the Venables approach and Lincoln Riley on the recruiting trail?
I'll start.
Lincoln. Go ahead.
Yeah,
I
was just going to say
you've got some points on this.
There's been a lot of change. I mean, yes, obviously OU, if you've been watching the recruitment, they did lose Ashton Kozar to Oregon in the last few weeks because, he committed quickly after Venables took over, and he was about to commit right about Bedlam, but right before Lincoln Riley left, and then he still jumped on board and came and committed to the Sooners, and obviously he ended up flipping. He's from the Pacific Northwest, but it seems like Venables and Riley, the big difference is Venables is preaching culture, a family mantra. Like I saw some pictures like the Champ U family barbecue. It's more of creating as a unit, and the sole mission has been totally different. It seems to be more developing young men for more off the field. While these are the best athletes in the country, the odds of all of them going pro are just not realistic. And for them to be able to have their degree and be developed as great people off the field, that is more, seems to be, obviously Venables wants to get great guys in the NFL, but I think the more important mission for him is to make sure he builds young men into great people and great productive citizens off the field.
As I've noted on here, and you guys can certainly correct me because I'm not close to the Oklahoma situation, but I watch all of college football and I've been watching for a long, long time. It's funny because Lincoln Riley's the offensive guru. And I think those guys tend to get a reputation, unless you know them, as being more freewheeling, open, transparent, while the defensive guys are staunch and level-headed and more grinded out nuts and bolts. But it seems to be flipped here, where Lincoln Riley's the guy that's maybe a bit paranoid. Let's lock down the fences, can't be transparent. And we're running a bit of a secretive operation here, versus Brent Venables, the defensive guy, being, hey, this is Oklahoma football. We're going to be a family. We're going to be transparent. These news conferences, he talks and talks and talks and explains things. He seems to be very comfortable with himself and very on the opposite end of paranoia. Not to say that Lincoln Riley's paranoid by any stretch, but Brent Venables would be at the opposite end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I think it's a fair criticism, or at least a fair observation there. But I think that the guys are now where they're culturally kind of belong. I feel like Lincoln Riley, when he was recruiting, going back one step back to your last question, the difference in the recruiting, he's very much a Hollywood, very flashy, but he does keep a lot of things close to the vest. And we had Toby Rowland on our show a couple months back, and that's something that he mentioned, because he interviews all the coaches regularly, and he mentioned Lincoln is very close to the vest. He'll tell you, he'll be open about some things, but clearly he's not going to be as talkative as a Brent Venables, who's going to tell you every single thing and probably answer to an extent that you didn't expect. So as a media person, he loves that, right? But it's definitely a change, and I think that it is weird coming from a defensive coach, but with how recruiting is nowadays and college football overall, how it's changing, it's all extremely transparent with social media. The kids are very open about what's happening with their recruitment, even if they're not telling on their Twitter or Instagram, this is my top school right now. With recruiting platforms like On3 and 24/7, their own Twitter pages, I think the openness is helping Oklahoma and Brent Venables get more kids to look at Oklahoma as a program after the shift from Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a whole different deal. And, we're not at the media days and the press conferences. Eventually we'd like to be there, but it just seems like everything we've been reading, all the reporters have been happy, and it's like a brush of fresh air, and that they are able to actually get some information about the team. And Venables will go at length about various things that they have questions regarding the team. And it's like he's got nothing to hide. Venables is very much a straight shooter. Why not be open and honest if you've got nothing to hide? And it seems like it brings a lot more excitement. He's preaching he's taken kind of the all in, from Clemson as well, like putting everyone, not just the players. I mean, it's also the fans. I mean, just the showing of the spring game of 73,000 people. Granted, I know that there was a lot of hype from, the transition from Riley to Venables, but with him, telling the fans, you need to come show up, and, you're part of this, and you need to be all in for it. It's just, he's got nothing to hide. He's shooting everyone straight. And I think he's genuine. And I think fans and recruits and players know that. And I think they're able to buy in on that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think we've seen a couple players tweet about just the family atmosphere that you guys are alluding to now, and it's. I think Coach Chavez quote tweeted a player talking about, coaches all the time talk about family and what it means and this and that, but listen to it means more when you hear it from a player themselves. You mentioned at the spring game the 70,000 people showing up, but that's agreed. A lot of us are excited about this transition from Riley to Venables, but as you mentioned, Brent Venables has made an effort on social media at basketball games, wherever he is, to kind of let the fans know that we are a part of this. And it's not just with football. Like he kind of wears it. He wears his emotions on his sleeves kind of guy. But as you guys have said, he's got nothing to hide. He's doing what he feels is right. I think there's not a lot to not like so far about this transition from Coach Riley to Venables.
So, Brandon, while we're on that comment, I'm going to latch on to that. And some people are going to roll their eyes in the chat because, as you can imagine, we do an Oklahoma show once a week. You guys are on it day after day after day, every second. But we do one Oklahoma show per week and then have some other guests on as well with OU football. And I know we're rewinding several months, but this is the first time I've had you guys on, and people again are going to roll their eyes at the thought of let's go through Lincoln Riley again. And I get that they're done with Lincoln Riley. I would be too, but I want to get your perspective on this because obviously you're talking about a top 5 program in the country. You're talking about a guy that was highly thought of. You're talking about a team that was dominating the conference. And then all this comes out after he leaves. That obviously wasn't taken well. Both that, it's unprecedented that we have a coach who's leading an elite program leave for another would-be or used to be elite program. And we had it happen twice in the span of a couple of days with Brian Kelly and Lincoln Riley. And then it was the manner in which he left. I just want to get you guys' take on, wow, this is going to be a wide open question. Lincoln Riley's tenure at OU, was he as good as people thought he was? Now that you can kind of look back on it, just how he left the program, just his tenure, and how you feel about, obviously you guys were, I'm sure, listening to a ton of fans that were in panic mode for a few days, if not a few weeks, about what's going to happen. And now that it's transitioned to Brent Venables, just your review of Lincoln Riley, what he's all about, and his tenure at OU.
So with Lincoln Riley, I think his offense with Toby Rowland, and obviously on this show and with our fan base, we're not huge Lincoln Riley people anymore, I guess is a nice way to say this here. But his offense is, you can't deny what they produced. It is going to be a slight drop off, I think, at least going into year one with Jeff Lebby and Dylan Gabriel. There's going to be some growing pains. I know they've had time together at Central Florida, and he understands the system. But I think going from that Lincoln Riley offensive system to Jeff Lebby, there is going to be a little bit of a drop off, at least right away. But I don't think it's something that's going to be long term. I think we'll pick it up. I think as far as how Lincoln Riley left, that was a hot topic of discussion on our show for a long time. And as Jose was talking about earlier, we asked Toby Rowland the same question because he's a guy who is close with, or who was close with Coach Riley. Got to interview him, at least once a week with the coach's show, going to practice, things like that. And so we all believe that Lincoln Riley knew before that Bedlam game that he was leaving. Just the way that he convinced the whole coaching staff that he took with him to go 24 hours after the game, things like that. And, he always talks about how it was just a spur of the moment type deal, whatever. No, none of us believe that as far as.
Has anyone here made a life-changing major decision about your family, where you're going to work, traveling across the country, all of that in like 3 hours after you just coached biggest game of the season? I just don't think that happens.
So we asked Toby Rowland, the voice of the Sooners, and he was actually telling us that him and his crew that calls the game with him, they were talking about it on the way up to Stillwater, and they actually believed that there was a possibility that he would take the LSU job. Just there was a lot of smoke around it at the time. It was something we were all concerned about, I think, as OU fans, and he immediately shuts that down in the post-game presser from the OSU game. Says, "I'm not going to LSU." Whatever. 2 hours later, it feels like he's we're seeing all the tweets that he's going to USC. So I think the way he did it could not have been done in a worse way. And then not only that, then he gets on TV like a week later and he's talking about how, and boys, you know how passionate I get about this on our show, when he's talking about how he doesn't take players from Oklahoma, he takes them from the transfer portal, or when he says that the NCAA needs some guardrails because it's getting ridiculous. And Lincoln Riley, you are the reason that the NCAA would need guardrails. Like, you did this.
Yeah.
If I could just cut in before you other two go, the one that really set me off was once I heard that he only met with the team for like 5 minutes. Okay, these players have invested their lives in making a decision because of where you're going to be. And I know it's difficult for these coaches leading up to this decision when they face the media and they got to say the right things and they got to walk a tightrope if they're considering other jobs. And I understand that's difficult for them. But when you can't face your team, I think at that point, you give them all the time that you can possibly give them to vent, to whatever you need to do. They have practiced and toiled and lifted weights and done all the things that they've done day after day after day for years, some of them for 4 or 5 years, and you're going to step in for 5 minutes and then see ya. That's not right.
Yeah, that whole deal, whenever I was reading about how fast and how quick his, leaving was and all that stuff, was ridiculous. But kind of looking at his tenure as a whole, I will say, I'm not going to, obviously I'm a little biased, but you have to look at it as a whole. He came in and took over for Bob Stoops. And I felt like when Bob Stoops was coaching towards the last few years, it felt a little stale, and it felt like OU needed a new face and a little bit of a revitalization. OU was playing well. They were winning a lot of games, but they weren't competing at the highest of high levels. Obviously you think about the Sugar Bowl against Alabama. That was one of the, great bowl games and everything, but it felt like OU needed to take that next step. And when Bob Stoops retired and Lincoln Riley took over, I was extremely excited. And you look at his tenure, how many, trips to the college football playoffs, Heisman winners. The team was playing at an extremely high level. The offense was figured out. He was terrific. His name now, Lincoln Riley's name, it pulls obviously the highest profile quarterbacks. Most quarterbacks want to play for him, and I don't blame him. He's got a proven track record, back-to-back number 1 overall picks, Heisman winners. Why wouldn't you want to go play on his offense? He just couldn't figure out the defense. Granted, he kind of inherited, Mike Stoops, and he made the decision to get rid of him after the Texas game. And I don't blame him for that, because it felt like everyone, including us and, everyone in the stands, wanted Mike Stoops gone. But with the Grinch coming in, and the defense was playing better. It just wasn't at the next level. And I just felt like the whole fan base, or the boosters, and he wasn't getting what he wanted as far as the financial support and everything, and more of a coaching staff and more recruiting and all that stuff. And I think he felt like he would get that at USC, and I think that's what they promised him. And I think there was a sense of the OU boosters and the money that they didn't totally believe in him, and they weren't going to open up the checking accounts for him, and like they've done for Brent Venables. The amount of money and the renovations that they're starting to do with Venables and the buy-in with the boosters and everything else is totally different than with Lincoln Riley. There's probably some behind-the-scene things happening that none of us know about, but he was a terrific coach. The way he left, he could have done it better, and he has even said he would like to, if he could go back, he would do it differently. His tenure, it was a great time, it was a great ride, but I feel like Bob Stoops took the program a little, higher. Riley took it even higher, and I think Venables can take that next and final step, because at the end of the day, defense wins championships. Most of the teams that win the national championship are with great defenses. That's just what happens and what most teams in every sport does.
All right. So out of the 3 of us, I feel like I'm the least I'm critical, but definitely the least critical of the move. Definitely not to say that I wasn't passionately against Lincoln Riley for a few weeks there after he left, because I was. But looking back, like Brum said, he won a lot at Oklahoma. Like that's something you can't deny. He went to the playoffs multiple times, Big 12 champion, most of his years there. He was successful. The one thing that you can always poke at is he was never able to hire a defensive staff that was able to get him to the next level. And I think that's something that some SC fans that are really high on this, and I understand them, like that SC is going from a program that has historically they're really good, but has been underperforming recently. So they're getting an upgrade at coaching, but their defense is still suspect. Maybe they'll improve over the next 3 years, but I think that's something that I think as college football fans we should all look at, because if that can improve, I think Lincoln Riley has the potential to head a team to get into a national championship. I don't know if that's anytime soon, but I also wouldn't say that it's impossible. With how he left Oklahoma, like, yeah, it's obviously not a good look. Like you said, Mark, like why would you only talk to your team for 5 minutes if you felt like this was an all right decision? These guys, like you mentioned, made the decision to come to Oklahoma to, at the end of the day, play for you. And he's kind of leaving them in the dust. That's obviously not a great look. But as long as he makes the right decisions wherever he's coaching, he can field a great offense. It's the other side of the ball that he's very hands off. I think that's why I like Venables right now. It seems like he is more hands off and just looking at it as a CEO. If we're going to look at it like a company, right? He's making sure that all aspects are working as a unit. Lincoln Riley is very hands-on the offense, and it seems like very hands-off the defense, and is letting Grinch head that program. And the players that have left Oklahoma recently, for example, Perion Winfrey is probably the biggest advocate of this. Not a huge fan of that defensive staff that is now at USC.
So just to wrap up the narrative, you guys know how storylines, narratives get blown out of proportion, that if a player or coach gets tagged or a program with something, everybody believes that's all it is. And of course, Lincoln Riley inherited that Oklahoma gets blown out in the playoffs from Bob Stoops. So he has to kind of take that on. Plus, he played in 3 playoff games. I don't think he gets near enough credit for the effort against Georgia in the Rose Bowl. It was a toss-up. They could have been in the national championship game. The Alabama game, you can credit them. Did they actually come back in the second half, or did Alabama put it on cruise control? You can spin that either way. I'm going to go that Alabama was a pretty damn good football team, and who's going to play with them. And the LSU game was, yeah, they got destroyed. Okay. But
Mark,
again, the narrative gets just overridden that they get blown out all the time on the national stage. So I think he was a bit unfairly judged for those 3 games to a certain extent. All right, we'll put the close on that. I just wanted to hear your perspectives, and it was really good stuff from all 3 of you.
Can I bring up just one? Oh,
sure.
just one thing on that Georgia game. I think as OU fans, you watch the game and they're dominating the first half, 31-10 or 31. No, it's 31-14, about to be halftime, and I think they make the decision to squib kick, and that obviously cost them 3 points right before halftime. And then as great as the first half of a game that I think Lincoln Riley called, and it was masterful with the trick plays, everything they're doing. They were on one. But in that second half, just to, I guess, a little bit disagree with you on giving Coach Riley too much credit for that Georgia game, because I feel like in that Georgia second half, he might be the reason we lost the game. Yeah, you have the Heisman winner on your team, and then in overtime, he doesn't throw the ball one time in overtime. And they on 3rd and 2, they run an end around to Jordan Smallwood that gets blown up. Then they miss the kick, and then the rest is, it's history. I think the moment got a little big for Coach Riley there. That was his first season at OU. It was a big one. But I think Coach Riley coached one of the worst halves of his coaching career in that second half against Georgia, and ultimately it cost the Sooners the trip to the title game. That's my belief, at least.
I definitely want to respect you guys' time, so we're going to keep going and going and going, and whenever you guys need to get off, just let me know, and you guys can check out. But we got 2 Plain Sports here. Please check them out on Twitter and right here on YouTube especially. We'll get the banner up here in just a second. Follow them there with Oklahoma Football Talk. You can tell here in the 25 or 30 minutes we've been on, they know their stuff, so get on over there and check out their work. Okay. on to 2022. You guys covered recruiting out of the gate. A lot of people are being more specific about the barbecue, whether that's going to yield any results, commits. Is there anything else you guys want to hit on in regards to who could possibly be expected to make a commitment soon, or what kind of yield we're going to see this summer in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I'll start it off with it. Obviously we talked about a little bit earlier with Brent Venables' philosophy of, you're going to commit whenever you're fully ready and you're going to shut it down. So obviously OU doesn't have quite as few or quite as many commitments as what Riley might have at this point in his, if he was still at Oklahoma, which is totally fine. OU's in a great spot with a lot of kids. One kid that comes to my mind is Dylan Edwards. He's out of Derby, Kansas. He's a running back, 2023. He's a 3-star, 4-star, depending on where you're looking at. He had a couple thousand yards last year, Kansas Gatorade Player of the Year. I feel like, he's in a recruitment with OU, Nebraska, maybe Kansas State and Jackson State, but he might be a commitment that'll come here pretty soon. Another kid is Bryson Sanders. He's from Chattanooga, Tennessee. He's a 2023 4-star offensive lineman. It's between Tennessee, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma. LSU was there, and they've kind of fallen off. He's going to announce his commitment. I believe it's on June 23rd. So those two guys come to my mind that could be commitments quickly after this barbecue. OU's in a great spot with 2023 4-star Derek LeBlanc. I think he's up for his 5th unofficial visit to the Sooners. He's out of Kissimmee, Florida. A terrific player. There's a lot of kids that OU's in a really good spot for, but Sanders and Dylan Edwards are the two that come to my mind that could be quick commits after, but I see OU picking up commitments, maybe 5 to 10 commitments throughout the summer. It's just going to, as the senior season approaches for these 23 kids, you'll see a lot of them start to pull the trigger, I think.
There's a bit of
I think Dylan Edwards is going to be the guy.
Go ahead, Herbert.
Sorry, I was just going to emphasize. I think Dylan Edwards will be the first guy we'll see commit after this barbecue, for the reason that you said earlier, Mark. Brent Venables wants these kids to be 100% sure that they want to be Sooners, and I think that's what's getting some fans to get to the point where they're maybe not quite pushing the panic button, but they've opened the lid to that panic button, is because we're not seeing the commits come in at the volume that Lincoln Riley did so early on. And it's because of the philosophy that Venables has, which is until you're 100% sure that Oklahoma is your home, keep exploring. Once you get to that point where you feel confident, then we'll talk about your commitment.
All right. Appreciate everybody on the chat here. We got about 120 on the line. Appreciate the comments and questions, and we'll get them to these guys as quickly as possible. Again, it's 2 Plain Sports right here on YouTube. Get on over there, check out their content concerning OU football. A lot of questions about, general questions about what's the offense going to look like? What's the defense going to look like? Is there a concern whether, Venables can recruit offense, those sorts of things. But when we look at the offense, let's start with Dillon Gabriel, of course. Any concern that, he faced the American Conference for 3 seasons? And face some good defenses at times during the season, but he's going to be facing collectively better defensive play from week to week with the likes of Texas and Kansas State and some defense, Oklahoma State and Baylor, obviously, in the Big 12.
I think this offense as a whole can be great, and I think it goes as far as Dillon Gabriel takes us. I remember when Dillon Gabriel first was in the portal, he was committed to UCLA, and I think Brum brought it up on one of our shows. This is right around the time Caleb Williams was leaving too, and it's one of the first names that Brum mentioned is keep an eye out for Dillon Gabriel. This guy could be coming, the familiarity with Jeff Lebby, this and that. And Mark, to kind of piggyback off what you said, I remember being on the show and expressing my concern because of what you just said. The fact that he's playing in the American Athletic and things of that nature, and not playing maybe toughest or quite as good as competition as he'll see at Oklahoma. So I did have that concern. And not only that, but you lose Caleb Williams, Austin Stogner, Jaden Hazelwood, Mario Williams. This offense has had some departures, but at the same time, as the summer has progressed, as Jose alluded to earlier, you bring in 2 former 4-stars in about a week of each other, and LV Bunkley Shelton and JJ Hester at receiver. I think that those guys are going to be pretty damn good. I think Jalil Farouk is a pretty good receiver. I think the running backs are going to be pretty solid. I think Javante Barnes is going to be one of the best running backs we've seen in a while at OU. Kenny Brooks, another departure, but so I think Javante Barnes is going to be good. I think Marcus Major is going to take that next step. I think the pieces are there for this offense to click and be pretty darn good. I think it might take a couple weeks just to get their bearings and figure it all out. But I think I realistically think it could be a top 15, top 10 offense in the country because I think the weapons are there, and it's going to depend on if Dylan Gabriel can take that next step against the better level of competition.
What makes me not too concerned about this, Dylan Gabriel specifically in the offense, is how Dylan and Levy did work together back in UCF, and I believe that was Dylan's best year at Central Florida. So I think as long as they can, and it's been some time that they've worked together, but if they can get that cohesiveness again and get the pieces on this offense to work as one whole unit, they'll be fine. So I'm not sure if I'll go ahead and say top 10, top 15, but they'll be a really good offense in college football, as long as that familiarity is there between both of them. If it was Dylan Gabriel with a completely different offense that he's never touched before and a completely different coach that he had no real relationship with in the past, then I could see how it's a much bigger concern because, like both of you have said, playing in the AAC, there was some competition that they faced, but it's not going to be to the level of players or coaches that he's going to be facing this year.
Yeah, and I think the key is going to be is they need to keep Dylan Gabriel healthy. Keep him upright. Don't let him get hit. And I think this offensive line is going to be one of the better ones that we've had in the past few years. You look at this offensive line, they brought in McCade Mettauer. He's a transfer from Cal. Just looking, Anton Harrison at left tackle, McCade Mettauer at left guard, Rame, which he's a young guy, but he played quite a bit last year at center. You got Chris Murray at right guard, and then Wanya Morris, which is the Tennessee transfer from the previous offseason. That offensive pairing, that offensive line is extremely strong, and the depth at the running back position is a lot better than what it was last year. There was a time where I felt like if OU lost one running back last year, I don't know who they would turn to. It was someone way down the depth chart. They brought in a lot of depth there. There's a lot of talent along that offensive line that they're going to be able to not have to rely quite as much on Dylan Gabriel to do everything. They're going to be able to protect him. They're going to be able to run the ball. And then as long as they can run the ball and keep him upright, he's going to make the passes. Yes, he's at the American Athletic, and it might not be perfect in the very beginning, and nor should we expect it to be. With a whole new system, and he's been away from the system that Levy had for a few years. But I feel like by games 3 or 4, you're going to see Gabriel really feel comfortable and really get rolling, and that we're going to be able to run the ball and really have solid defense where Gabriel might not have to put up 45 points a game to win a football game. They might be able to only need to put up, 30, 35. So while some games I felt like with the previous staff, you'd have to put up 50 points to win, I feel like with this new staff and this new, defensive scheme, OU might only have to average 35 points a game to really to win, and they can run the ball and protect him. I think they're gonna be fine. I'm not gonna say that they're gonna go win a national championship next year, but they very well could win the Big 12 championship again and play for a New Year's Six bowl.
Do you guys have a good feel of how they're going to juggle these running backs with the 2 studs coming in, Javante Barnes and Gavin Sawchuk, versus Eric Gray's more than a capable back, Marcus Major back in the mix? What direction that looks like, and how they possibly, based on their skill sets, complement each other?
Yeah, I'll just. Oh, sorry, Jose. Go ahead.
I would say that because Marcus Major didn't play in the spring game, it's hard to predict right now. But it seems like Marcus Major, with what's been reported coming out of the spring practice, he seems to be on track to have a significant role in the offense. But if you're just watching the spring game as a fan of Oklahoma or college football, Javonte Barnes looks like he's going to be a problem for defenses. Maybe not next year, but the year after, when he can get the majority of the touches as a running back, I think he'll be one of the better running backs in college football. Gavin Sawchuk, I believe he just enrolled for the summer, so that one is still TBD. But he's very, very talented. I think coming out of high school, he's got the ability to be more of a change of pace back. He's really good at catching the ball out of the backfield. He just needs to get some muscle added on top of him. He's only 18 years old. If he can put on some weight, then just to get over that hurdle of being concerned about potential injury, then I think he can be a really good number 2 guy to either a Marcus Major or Javonte Barnes.
Yeah, I almost think that Javonte Barnes is going to play a significant role this upcoming football season. Just the way, we've talked about on our show where the greatest ability at times is the availability, and Marcus Major has had some injury issues, and that's some unfortunate luck. But Javonte Barnes, the way he's playing is it looked incredible. Eric Gray, he's going to get his own. He's going to do really well. I think Marcus Major will contribute. They're just going to have, I think Gavin Sawchuk will most likely redshirt this year. I mean, he's just behind the 8 ball. I mean, he's a terrific talent, but with him only enrolling, this summer and missing all of spring, I think that really puts him behind. But he might come in for a few games to maintain his redshirt. I think he's got a lot of potential.
Yeah, no, I'm very, very high on Javonte Barnes, and I think the season will start with Marcus Major and Eric Gray being 1 and 2. I think Eric Gray Coach Riley was adamant about keeping him in the starting lineup last year, even though Kennedy Brooks was, I think, the superior running back, and eventually it did change to where Kennedy Brooks became the lead back, and he had a hell of a season. Eric Gray, I think, was a little bit of a disappointment to me, at least, because I expected a lot, and Kennedy Brooks is, I think he's a monster, so that probably hurt him a little bit. But I think the season will start off with a 1-2 punch of Marcus Major and Eric Gray, but then as the season develops by about week 4 or 5, I think Javonte Barnes is going to take over that Eric Gray role for number 2, and kind of be a 1-2 with Major.
Yeah, and I will say one more thing. I don't want to leave him out. Is Tawny Walker. OU added him. He's a JUCO transfer. He's from a JUCO out in California. Tawny Walker is he's a little heavier. I think he's around 220 pounds. He looked really good throughout spring. And I know he's a JUCO transfer, and there's a lot of 4 stars above him and a lot of hype above him. Tawny Walker looked really good. And I wouldn't be surprised if Marcus Major, for whatever reason, gets hurt or isn't fully healthy. Tawny Walker could compete for some snaps this fall. The way he looked in the spring, and it might totally change this summer, he looked really good.
Let's move on to this topic because I'm going to be fascinated to hear what you guys have to say about this. So this is obviously the one that shook the universe of college football this time last year, and that's OU and Texas moving on to the SEC. All right. So you guys can just take on all the narratives here because it's basically, does Oklahoma benefit from going to the SEC? Obviously, money, attention, preference given to the team. If there's a struggle to get into a college football playoff spot, they're going to be given, that lean, you would think. Recruiting seemed to have affected Texas A&M in a huge positive way, even before NIL. Let's not get into that side of it, but even before that, the Texas A&M certainly just turned into a different program almost. Didn't really reflect on the field. They still went 8-4 and 7-5, but just seemed like the attention given to Texas A&M, again, even before NIL, was that they're suddenly this elite program. Oklahoma's obviously already there, but just the move to the SEC, what you think it means to the program, good and bad, and what you would like to see come of this scheduling situation in regards to pods or divisions, or what that should look like.
Who wants to take this first, boys?
So I think overall as a whole, and something we've talked about for the team, the long term outlook of the team, everything, kind of as you mentioned, I think it's very good for us. We talk frequently on our show about. I think the move to the SEC is going to help us in terms of recruiting, not only because you're playing in the biggest, toughest conference, whatever. You're drawing these Alabamas, these Georgias weekly. It's gonna be so cool to have the Crimson Tide rolling to Norman for the first time, if that when that happens, and it's just gonna be rocking. But like, I think avoiding these 11 a.m. kickoffs that we seem to get strapped with every single week, regardless of opponent, is going to help in terms of recruiting. We're going to have more eyes on our games now. We're going to have these recruits that we have on the West Coast. They're, instead of having to wake up at 8 a.m. to watch OU games, or especially if we're flying them in for a visit, if they play Friday night at 7 o'clock their time, and then they have to get on a plane right away and be in Norman at 11, it's just a quick turnaround. I think in terms of recruiting, in terms of more eyeballs on the program. You mentioned what's going to happen in the college football playoff when things are close. In terms of who gets in, who doesn't, that's going to be a huge benefit. I think overall for the long-term outlook for this team, we've talked about on our show, it's all positive. I think we might have a growing pain or a year or so. We'll see, but overall, and I think we got the perfect guy to lead us into the SEC in Brent Venables. So I think, I'm excited about it.
Jose?
I think the move to the SEC was a good call. Like Brandon said, the fact that the Oklahoma and Texas carry the Big 12 as a conference, at least financially, and probably with eyeballs as well, I believe is a fair assumption. And they're still getting slotted in with all these early morning games. It's going to affect how well their potential at recruiting is. Moving to the SEC, not only is there already a lot of hype around the conference, like you said, Mark, A&M, as soon as they move to the SEC, now they're somehow one of the best programs in the country before really doing anything. That's going to that. Oklahoma and Texas are already seen as big brands, and Oklahoma is already one of the best programs in the country right now. It's just going to help build those brands even more. Now, with I don't know how quickly we can win. I think what's going to be the key to Oklahoma's success is someone that isn't really spoken about, and he's not on the coaching staff. It's Thad Turnipseed. He will, if he can really help Brent Venables and just the operations of football upgrade to the SEC caliber, because I believe he worked with Alabama. He knows what it's like to operate a football program in that conference. If he can make that transition pretty smooth, I think this team won't really have any hiccups going into the SEC, because their facilities, the finances will all be there for the coaches to succeed. I think what some programs could face when moving conference is they're not sure what they're going in. They're not completely 100% sure what they're going into with finances in the new conference, how they're going to recruit, how it's going to really affect recruiting. These guys know, they understand. So as long as that transition is made more smoothly, Oklahoma will be just fine in the SEC. And with regards to scheduling, the pod system makes sense. I don't know if I think it's fine. I'd much rather see just two divisions still, because I don't know. I think it would just make it easier to consistently have that OU Texas game and make sure that A&M isn't running away from Texas, because it seems like if everything that's reported is true, A&M is very adamant about not wanting to consistently play Texas every single year. But that's a big game for the state of Texas and the fans of both schools. Like, why wouldn't they want to play each other? I think the divisions would just make it easier to continue having those old school rivalries that have been missed for a while now.
Yeah, and to add on to both Brandon and Jose's points, I mean, the move to the SEC overall, I think long term is great for OU. Not just for football, but basketball and baseball and everything. Just the amount of money that the program is going to be able to start generating, even more so. I do think that if OU and Texas would have stayed in the Big 12, is the path to the college football playoffs a little easier? Yeah, I mean, I would think, I don't think I'm ridiculous for saying that. They might be able to make the playoffs a few more times staying in the Big 12. But as we've seen the last few times that, they've been in the playoffs, it's not been close. The recruiting footprint of the Big 12 and what OU is able to do, they're able to recruit very well, but it's just that next step. All the top defensive players, I can't say all, but majority of top defensive players want to play in the SEC. I mean, when you look at the NFL draft, I mean, you look at Georgia and Alabama, all the, so many 5 stars, 4s and 5 stars gets drafted in the first round. They want to go play in the SEC. And the footprint that now joining the SEC gives Oklahoma to recruit from, the state of Florida, Georgia, Alabama. I mean, I'm not saying that they're going to be able to get all the 5 stars out of the state of Alabama. I mean, we got to remember that Alabama's still there, or even Georgia. You're not going to be able to get everyone out of Georgia, but OU's in a great spot for a lot of top 23 and 24 recruits out of the state of Georgia, out of the state of Louisiana. I mean, it's before they wouldn't really have a whole lot of interest unless you grew up an OU fan or your parents went to OU. Why would you want to go play in the Big 12 and then also you're never able to come home and play in front of your friends and family? If you do, live in the state of Florida, you go play at Oklahoma, OU is going to be going to Alabama, go Georgia, University of Florida, and they're going to be back in this area throughout the years that they're playing there. It's a lot easier to sell the recruits on going to play at Oklahoma or even Texas for that matter. As far as the divisions or pods, I agree, Jose. I like the whole idea of just divisions. I think it's just easier. You maintain your rivalries, and it's a rotating schedule of, and I hope it's a 9-game regular season schedule, a conference schedule. I will take 8 games because, as much as it drove me insane when we were in the Big 12, or I mean, we still are, but once we move, getting that easier game in November probably helps their chances. I mean, you can rest some players and it helps, but I do hope it's a 9-game conference schedule. I think that with OU and Texas going to the SEC, I think it's going to guarantee at least 2 SEC schools in the playoffs every single year, no matter what, whether it's Oklahoma and Texas or Alabama and Georgia or whoever. There's going to be it's too good of a conference to not have 2 teams from. I do think that they're going to have to expand the college football playoffs because of that as well. Whether they go to 6 or 8, I don't know. But I think overall it's good. It's going to be a few years for OU to really get rolling. I think they're going to do fine. I think they're going to compete at the highest level, and it's going to be something, it'll be fun.
To Jacob's point about the NFL draft, here's a couple banners that we had posted months ago during the NFL draft. The Big 12 did not have a first-round pick in the last 2 NFL drafts. Those are overall NFL draft selections. I know that all the numbers are jumbled there. It's a bit difficult to decipher there, but it's the SEC, it's the Big 10. And I ran the numbers for the last 10 years, and it's almost like it almost runs its course almost every year to a T. The SEC, Big Ten's about 60% of the SEC, and then it goes on from there, and that's pretty much what it is in the NFL draft. And that's what it is in recruiting as well. There's the top 50 players in the last, 5 recruiting cycles and where they've gone. The SEC, more than twice of the Big Ten, and then on down the line. Same thing again with the NFL draft. So, and then in terms of money, right now, the Big Ten and the SEC are bringing in like close to $70 million per team. And the Big 12's at like 35 to 38 million. And then it's going to go to like 90 something for the SEC once Oklahoma and Texas jump in there. Even with dividing it among 2 other schools, it's going to have that kind of an impact. So this is good for the SEC too, not just good for Oklahoma. I don't think there's any question about that. Is it good for college football? Well, if the sport responds the way it should, it could be, but it also could be detriment to the rest of college football. Do you guys care about what happens to the Big 12 now? No. Okay. We don't even need to go there.
It'll still be fun to watch. I think it'll still be fun to watch with the addition of Cincinnati. I really like Luke Fickell. I think he's a really good coach, but I don't know why he has so many doubters and people were so down on Cincinnati being a playoff team. But he took a team in a group of 5 conference to get as far as they did. Like, I think he'll be fine at the Big 12 and maybe taken more seriously at that point.
I think for people that don't care about the playoff, I think it's going to be fascinating. I think it's going to be the most competitive conference in the country. Like, kick out Kansas and maybe Texas Tech, and they all could win that thing year to year. It's you throw those 4 schools in there, they're right on line with TCU, Kansas State, and in a good year, Oklahoma State, and what's been Baylor. Baylor's all over the place. They're a roller coaster. They have been, depending on what the NCAA thinks about them in any given time period and what's going on there. But oh my goodness, that's going to be a deep conference. It's just difficult to see that they're going to have that school or two, like especially the SEC and the Big Ten, Clemson, USC, that's going to be able to challenge. It probably doesn't exist, but it'll be interesting.
They'll probably just be the new version of what the Pac-12 has been over the last few years with regards to consideration of the playoff. I think the Pac-12 is going to get significantly more considerations with either USC or Oregon getting a berth rather than any Big 12 team, at least until one of them can show up. One or two of them can say, we can compete at that high level. And right, like you said, it's going to be competitive, but unless Baylor or Dave Aranda can make that big jump and make it consistent, it's going to be tough.
Now, what I do want to see, because I like oddities and I like odd situations and I like awkward situations, I want to see overlap. I don't want to see a clean break from the Big 12 and then the 4 come in after Oklahoma. I want to see overlap. I want to see them all in the league at the same time. And I know that they're going to try to keep them apart, but then it's going to be fascinating to see who makes the statement. Meaning, if Oklahoma and Texas, let's say their last 2 seasons playing the Big 12 championship game, that's a horrible look for the Big 12. Well, we know you lost your 2 money bases and your 2 best talent bases, but man, they really put a stamp on it by playing in the Big 12 championship game. That's the last thing that the Big 12 wants to see as those 2 head out. On the other hand, if the likes of Cincinnati and BYU and Houston, they can win these games head up against Texas and Oklahoma, well, that's a nice little look for the Big 12 and sending them on their way. Just like Oklahoma and Texas, if they can show up in the SEC and put up some 10 and 11 win seasons, then that obviously validates their entry. And then, you guys are going to have to take a beating, and you guys are prepared for this. If you step into the SEC and you go 7-5 the first year, all those Arkansas fans and Mississippi State fans are going to be like, see, you guys are stepping up and play. That's just the way it's going to be. Mm-hmm. It's going to be fascinating. Yep. Going to be fascinating. Can you give us a breakdown on the defense? A lot of people had asked about the defense just in general, just a review of what it's going to look like this year.
Brandon, right there?
Yeah.
No.
Oh,
okay. So I think the defense is going to look significantly better. And it's not because the personnel. I think the personnel is pretty similar. We did have we had significant losses with Nick Bonito leaving, Perion Winfrey, and Isaiah Thomas. I think those were, in my opinion, the biggest losses on this defense.
DTY.
Again, yeah, he left too, but I don't think he's as big of a loss as Nick Bonito or the guys on the defensive line. But what's going to be significantly different, again, to a comment I made earlier in the stream, there was a lot of missed tackles. The corners somehow were beat consistently on deep plays, either because either the safety was out of position or the corner just couldn't keep up with the receiver. I think, and then from when Venables came in, he mentioned that when he's talking to players that are returning to the program, the defense wasn't very complicated. It was extremely simple, and that's what Grinch wanted. That was his concept. Speed D, let's keep it simple and let's let them play free. It worked for a little bit, but it wasn't good enough to get Oklahoma over to the next level. Venables, being such a great defensive mind, he's fielded top 10 defenses multiple times in his career. I think he's going to help change that. He's changing the scheme to what he wants, and I think he's going to coach these guys to be a lot more aggressive at the point of attack when it's either at the tackle or going to knock the ball down, hopefully get a few more turnovers in the passing game. those small changes, I think, are going to go a long way with this new defense and the coaching staff.
Yeah, I think the defensive line, I think, is actually going to be really strong. It's going to surprise some people. When you look along that defensive line, OU picked up a transfer from Tulane, Jeffrey Johnson. He's going to be the nose tackle. I think he's going to be really solid. And then as long as Jalen Redmond can stay healthy and play at that other tackle position along the defensive line, Redmond and Jeffrey Johnson will be extremely solid. They'll both be able to rush the passer up the middle. And then you look at the outside, you've got Ethan Downs, Reggie Grimes, Marcus Stripling. It seems like Marcus Stripling has kind of had a revitalization, at least through the spring practice and the spring game. He looked great. Reggie Grimes, he looks good as well. But Ethan Downs, I think Brandon's been really high on him, and I'm high on him too. But he could have a terrific season. The way he's practicing and his whole mantra and his work ethic can be seen. Jonah Loalu, he's a transfer from Hawaii. In the spring game, they saw, I don't know how close everyone was watching it, but he even went out and was covering some wide receivers and some tight ends for a few packages. It's going to be, like Jose said, there's a lot more variety in this defense. There's a lot more, it's a little more sophisticated, different looks, different schemes, different blitz packages. So you're going to see different personnel packages, not this whole rotating where guys are more tired running off and on the field than they actually are playing the game. Looking at that defensive line, it's going to be strong. Danny Stutzman's going to have a great year. I mean, if he has a great year, he could be going to the NFL. Shane Witter, I'm hoping that he's going to take that next step. Deshaun White should be there as well. And I wouldn't be surprised if David Owegbu has a pretty solid year. He really came on a couple seasons ago, and then it seemed like he fell off a little bit last year. And then you've got Woody Washington and Key Lawrence and Billy Bowman, and then another transfer in Trey Morrison. And even some of the freshmen. I mean, Jaron Canick could play some. Jaden Rowe could play some. There's a lot of depth, a lot of great athletes, and I think overall the scheme and the just the coaching is going to put these players in such better positions to make plays and excel at.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And you talking about the spring game, I think Stripling had one of the best spring games. He had a couple sacks. I think Reggie Grimes had a couple sacks himself. A guy you didn't mention that I think could have a big year for us coming off the edge is Clayton Smith, former 5-star according to Rivals. He's got all the size, all the tools. I can't wait to see what Venables can do with him. Coach Bates on the line too. I think Clayton Smith can have a hell of a season coming off the edge for us, getting after the quarterback. You mentioned Jaron Canick and Jaden Rowe. If you guys watch Two Plane Sports at all, you know how we feel about Jaden Rowe. We think Jaden Rowe can be something really, really special with his the tools that he has, and then he's got just great size, great speed, great length. He can kind of play almost anywhere on that defensive side of the ball under Venables. He doesn't have to be a corner. He can play at safety. He can play linebacker. There's a lot to be excited about for this defense. I think it's going to be a total 180 from what we've seen the past 4 or 5 seasons. It does start up front, but I think this defense can be nasty.
Awesome stuff, folks, here from Two Plane Sports. We appreciate these guys being here. Get on over to Two Plane Sports right here on YouTube and check out their work. They came highly recommended, so I checked them out there for a recent show, and they were going at it. So I figured these guys know what they're talking about, and let's bring them on, and they come highly recommended, and appreciate you guys being here. A lot of talk in the off season about where programs stand historically. We've seen a lot of lists, the last 10 years, the 21st century. Of course, we're always going to see the all-time lists. So where do you guys say, okay, let's say for the last 10 years, let's go 10, and you can give us your 10 and your 20-year / 21st century, because it's about the same where Oklahoma stands on the pantheon.
That's a good question.
Is it Can we say top 10 as much as we want to in the past 10 or 20 years? I mean, we haven't won one since 2000, unfortunately. I guess the argument I would make that we could be in the top 10 is
You don't think you're in the top 10?
nah, it's the top 10, yes.
Wow. I got you higher ranked than you do. A
Yeah,
lot
top
higher ranked.
top 10 for sure. I don't know, but you look at Alabama, they've got to be number one. I think Clemson has to be a little higher.
We're
than
talking
us.
the last 10 years. Are we
last
talking
10 years? Yeah, okay.
10 years. Okay.
Last 10 years, you still have Alabama. Georgia has to be higher than us. Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, they've won one. Anybody who's won one has to be there. But
Okay. Everybody. Florida State.
See, that's where I don't know. Maybe that's where we'll draw the argument because this team has been to the college football playoff more than most teams in the country consistently. We've won our conference title more times than most teams in the country have. I think it's if we could have won one in 2017, which I think that team absolutely should have won one. And again, I think Lincoln choked that game away in the second half. If we win that game in 2017, I think we're one of the best, if not the best team in the past 10 years. But it's those small margins and winning and losing a national championship hurts us. So yeah, top 10 for sure. But can we say top 5, boys?
I would say number 5, and that would have been an argument, and that's one where I think we're for sure top 10. I would put us at 5, but anyone can argue from like Ohio State that they should be there to replace Oklahoma, because like Brandon said, I think without a doubt you have to put Alabama there, you have to put Clemson there. They've won 2 in the last 10 years. You have to put. I think you should put Georgia in for more recent stuff, but I don't know if you can put them at top 10 for the last 10 years. I think Oklahoma for a 10-year resume has put a pretty solid team. We haven't won a national championship, but like you said, we've consistently gone. We went to the playoffs multiple times, and I mean, not everyone like those opportunities are rare for a lot of teams, and Oklahoma's been spoiled and going. What is it? 2 times, if I remember correctly, 3 times.
Yeah, I would put okay. So my top school in the last 10 years of or football program has to be Alabama. There's no way you can really argue that. I think it's pretty clear. Nick Saban, he's either winning a national championship or he's playing for a national championship every year, almost every year. 2, I think it's a debate between Ohio State and Clemson. I would give the edge probably to the Buckeyes at number 2. Clemson's right there. 4, I think, is Oklahoma. I think OU's at 4, and it seems to be kind of where OU's been, playing as the number 4 seed in the college football playoffs. I think OU over the last 10 years, they've won over 80% of their games. They've been winning the Big 12 title. They have gone and, played in some other New Year's Six bowls. I think OU's number 4. Georgia's right there because Georgia's really starting to come on more recently at number 5. I don't know.
That's one that I was gonna. I'd slightly argue there. I don't. As much as I loved it, I don't know how you can put us above Georgia the past 10 years, only because they not only have won a national title, but they've made a national title appearance in a game that they beat us to get there. And granted, I think we choked that game away, but that it happened. So I don't know how we can be above Georgia in the past 10 years just based off of those 2 alone.
I mean, that's a fair point. I could see 4 or 5 being flipped between Oklahoma and Georgia. I think Oregon's up there. Notre Dame is, in the last rounding out the top 10. I think Oregon's up there. Notre Dame's up there, and a few other programs that have played well. And honestly, as much as I don't want to say this, and I might get a lot of flack for it, but I think OSU's on the cusp of the last 10 years as well. Oklahoma State. I really think that they've won a lot of games. They've done well. I wouldn't put them at 7 or 8, but they might be 10 to 12. I don't know. I think OU could be in that 4 or 5 spot. I don't think that's really unreasonable. And I think the reason why that's kind of the ceiling where OU's been at is because they've needed to take this next step in recruiting, the next step in financial funding from the SEC, and just the level of recruiting that they're going to be able to do to take that next step into the SEC in future, jumping up in that top 3.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question. Of course, Bama's won. That's not debatable. And like Jacob, I think Ohio State and Clemson have a great argument for number 2. If we're talking the last 10 years, so we're talking 2012 through 21. Those are the seasons. Ohio State's got a better record. They played in a better conference. Clemson's gone to 2 more national championship games. So it's depending on what your metrics are, what you value more. Ohio State more consistently excellent. Clemson's peaked more in the last 10 years. So I go Clemson 2, Ohio State 3. And then I give Georgia the nod over Oklahoma at 4 and OU 5, just because if we're going back to 2012, that Georgia team in 2012, they came within like a pass of going to the national championship game. So that gets kind of left off the front end of this argument. And then they've been just flat out top 5, living in the top 5 since 2017, where Oklahoma's been, again, more consistent. So I'm going to give Georgia, based on those peaks of 2 national championship game appearances and coming that close in the other one, at 4 and Georgia 5. And then I think it's really difficult. And I looked at this, LSU, Notre Dame, Michigan, you bring in Oklahoma State, Oregon, you'd really have to do it. Wisconsin, you'd have to do a really deep dive to just separate the next 8 to 10 schools. It's pretty difficult. The 20-year span is pretty fascinating between Ohio State and Alabama, because Alabama's got the peaks of the 6 national championships, but Ohio State by far is the best record in the 21st century, most top 5s, top 10s, all of that. And then, Oklahoma's got a similar debate against some of the schools like an LSU that's got the 3 peak national championships versus OU's consistency over time. And let's not forget 2000 national championship. Good stuff. All right, guys, anything we did not hit on that you guys would like to hit on? I don't see any other necessarily questions or comments in the live chat.
I'm really positive with leading, going in this fall season for OU. I think they're going to surprise some people. I think they're going to have a solid season. They very well might compete for a playoff spot, and maybe probably win the Big 12 and maybe even go to play in the playoffs. I think some commitments over the next month or 2 leading up into August, you'll see about 5 to 10 recruits commit to Oklahoma. A lot of momentum will be building as the fall season starts and early national signing day gets going or approaches. I think OU is going to be in a great spot, and they're going to land some kids that are going to surprise some people from a national perspective.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's a lot. It's an exciting time in Oklahoma football. It's going to be an exciting time the next month or so. I think we're going to see, as I mentioned with the show starter, I think we're going to see 5 or 6 recruits commit this next couple weeks to a month. You mentioned Dylan Edwards is one of the guys, but I think he's a lock. But there's a lot of exciting stuff coming down in Oklahoma. I think we had a good recruiting weekend. It's going to be a good season overall.
All right. Great conversation with these guys. Again, Two Plain Sports. You see it right there on the banner. For Jose, Brandon, Jacob, guys, appreciate you coming on here, giving of your time. And again, you guys are doing an outstanding job. And we will hopefully talk to you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And certainly for everybody else on the line, we will have our next call-in show here shortly, probably on Monday night. And you guys know what the deal is, starting on Tuesday with USC, Iowa, and Nebraska shows. So we'll see everybody Tuesday for sure, and probably with a call-in show on Monday night.